meadow that I've prayed for since I was a little boy and count angels flying overhead in the morning. That very well may happen. But by the love and the design and the honor of my Papa, He's allowed me to be here for this special day because He knew every one of you. He knew where you would be sitting. He knew your journey. He knew everything you'd been through. I was born the firstborn son of a man who was defined by everyone who ever knew my dad to be the finest man who ever lived in Madison County, Alabama, where I grew up. Our home office is in Atlanta, Georgia now, but we've only been there 13 years. That's where I was born and raised. My wife and I were born in the same hospital, delivered by the same doctor. So was our oldest son. Boy, we're a boring bunch of people, I'm telling you. Everything's just real repetitive in our family. And when I was 4 years old, my dad moved us from Huntsville, Alabama, back to Hazel Green, Alabama, a little hole-in-the-wall, nothing little country town just outside the outskirts of Huntsville. And he built a little 3-bedroom frame house right across a gravel road from where his father, my grandfather, had his cotton farm, about 80 to 100 acres of cotton. It was a gravel road. There wasn't much in the area at that time. And I was a little boy that loved to play outside, no shoes, no shirt, little cut-off shorts. I would run around annoying everyone, basically. And believe me, all of my African-American brothers and sisters in here, 15 minutes in the sun, and y'all think I was your cousin, I'm telling you. So that was the little fella that was running around all the time. And I was enjoying life. I remember looking up at my father and thinking he's the biggest giant in the land. He was hardworking, he was humble, he was shy. If you had met my father, you would have loved him. He was a very humble, hardworking man. He would give you 2 days' work for half a day's price. He used to grow gardens that, in my opinion, were truck patches that you would, 3 acres of butter beans, get real. But his design for that was he wanted to grow multitudes of vegetables just to give them away to people. I never could decide later if all of that was part of the design of upholding his reputation or if it was a part of the goodness that my Papa saw in my dad. When I was 5 years old, I was working, or I wasn't working, I was actually sitting at the base of a table saw in my father's workshop that he had built behind our house. He had a window fan going, a portable radio going, a little portable TV. He was a sports fanatic. NASCAR race, basketball, football, you name it, and he'd have multitudes of things on different things. It was just a noise going. I was sitting at the base of the table saw in the sawdust, catching little blocks that would come off of the table saw, building little castles to the sand, looking up at this man who was so strong, this mighty oak tree of a man. I loved him. I adored him. I wanted to grow up to be like him. I wanted to be big and strong. I loved that whole concept. Even at that age, I loved Superman. And one of the reasons I loved Superman was because he could fly. He had a red cape and the dude could fly. Don't talk to me about Batman. He ain't got nothing but a utility belt. He can't do nothing. Okay? Superman may be wearing red drawers in public, but he can fly. Okay? I loved it. And I would run across the cotton field oftentimes with my little homemade red cape around my neck and climb in my grandfather's barn loft, jump out of that thing yelling up, up, and away, fool that I was, thinking I could fly. And thank goodness my grandfather, who was a wonderful man, was discerning and wise enough to put a thick layer of hay at the bottom so this skinny little idiot would not break every bone in his body when he dove out. So I loved strong men, and to me, my dad was the strongest. On that particular afternoon, here's how everything started. From out of nowhere, I have no idea what prompted it. It could have been anything. I could have said the wrong thing, looked the wrong way. My dad loved to mumble directions, and you needed to get it the first time because my dad did not like to repeat himself. So I would often try my best to interpret. So maybe I didn't interpret fast enough. I don't know. But from out of nowhere, I remember on that fateful afternoon, Lucifer himself opened a door to ensure that there are some very rich treasures in this room that would never know the precious power that Papa wants you to leave here with today. My dad, with his fist clenched, hit me in the side of the face, sent me flying to the sawdust floor, covered in sweat, sawdust. I slid across the concrete, and I remember my head struck an old cabinet that was over in the corner of the workshop. I had seen what was in the bottom drawer of that cabinet many times. It's where my dad stored his pornography. In that day and time, his reel-to-reel 8mm films, his magazines, his Polaroid pictures of himself and various people. At 5 years old, I had already seen and beheld with my heart and my eyes more than any child should ever see. But that wasn't on my mind that afternoon. I was scrambling to get to my feet, tears streaming down, the pain excruciating. And you want to know the thought in abused hearts? This was my thought. If I can figure out what's wrong with me, maybe my daddy will love me. Just maybe he'll love me again. And before I could get to my feet, he was already on top of me again, kicking, slapping. He was spitting in my face, cursing me, and I will never forget his words. He told me that I was worthless and I would never be anything. That he regretted the day I was born. And I have 5 grandchildren. I had 3 sons, 4 beautiful granddaughters that range from 3 years old to 14 now. But among those grandchildren, I have a precious little grandson named Jackson. And he's 5 years old now. This has been an important year for me because every moment that I spend with Jackson, I think of that day. And I think of what Jackson looks like and how he looks at me and how he looks at his daddy and how trusting and how innocent he is. Hyper, yes, but trusting and innocent. He has his own red cape. I mean, it's a legacy in the family. As I got to my feet again, my dad knelt down before me, and for the first time I realized I could smell his alcoholic breath. And you know, my dad could drink a fifth of whiskey, walk that aisle as straight as an arrow. Hardly anyone except those very, very close to him knew that my dad drank. It was his reputation was impeccable till the day he died in the year 2008 at 79 years old. My dad was deemed by everyone who ever knew him as literally the most humble, hardworking, finest man they had ever known in their life. And until that moment, that's the man that I knew too. Here's how bad the enemy did not want today to happen. Before that afternoon was finished, my dad had a partition wall down the center of that workshop. He was going to finish the wall so that he could build furniture on one side and he could spray it and finish it on the other. But so far, it was just a stud wall. It had not been finished yet. And on that fateful afternoon, before Lucifer was finished with what he hoped would silence everything forever, he hoped would shame and break God's anointed little vessel so badly that he certainly would never make it here. Not this many years later, not 53 years later. My dad stripped me of the remainder of my clothing. He tied my hands to that stud wall. And when he was finished with me sexually, I remember looking down to realize that I was standing in a pool of my very own blood. And as surely as you had killed that little 5-year-old Danny Wallace that day and buried him out behind that workshop, that little boy never came back. Now, he still shows up today in some weird ways. Maybe a few too many rings, maybe who knows what I'll show up in tonight. You can't ever tell. Could be the red cape. I don't know. You'll just have to come find out. The little boy does show up occasionally. He certainly shows up in Papa's design to resurrect that innocent child again, to simply tell you this most powerful message of all, that it is His heart to bless you and not to curse you. It is His heart to love you without a single condition attached. He is not a performance God. He is a God after hearts. And the power of forgiveness over you and over me, that begins with forgiving those who deserve it the very least. That's what Papa wanted to save for today and resurrect from that broken little boy. My dad knelt down in front of me and he said, if you ever speak of this to anybody, I'll murder you, I'll bury you on this property, and they won't find you for years. And I knew that he meant it. So across those next years, from 5 till 10, my dad held true to his promise. Things, I'm telling you, were horrible behind closed doors of the finest man who ever lived. Across the years from 5 till 10, he had sold me to more men than I could count who would pay my father for a little fun with the kid. We recently recorded a live DVD that's called No Harm Done Beyond the Talking Points, where I take you on one of those journeys. And it is an amazing and powerful journey. It will be made free, the same as our No Harm Done audio CD is free. We've currently given away more than 2 million of those around the world. And we plan on giving away millions of this DVD series. But today I'm not going to take you on one single journey. Let it be enough for me to tell you that that was my life. That was my life behind closed doors. Now, outside of closed doors, I taught myself to play keys when I was 6 years old. And I may play some for you tonight, and you'll know full well that I taught myself, that nobody else did, just to verify it for you. But God had just placed that gift in me, and we had one Christian that I knew of in our family. That was my dad's oldest sister. And she and her husband, he led the little youth choir at a little community Bible church close by where we lived. And they took an interest in me because my uncle loved gospel music. Back in that day, it was Southern gospel music, and he would take me to the old singings with the Happy Goodman family, the Singing Rambos, people like that. And so across those years, I guess I got a little better because I can remember special times when I might be somewhere and Sister Vestal may say, well, Danny's here, he knows that song, let's let him play it tonight. And my current book, that a movie and a documentary is being made about the life story that is in my book that I'm only going to share portions with you this morning. It's called Masquerade, a True Story of Unmasked Freedom. I titled it Masquerade because from the moment my father raped me in that workshop, from the very moment the door was opened and that he said, I'll murder you if you ever share this, I became Danny Wallace, the Grand Masquerader. Now, granted, those initial masks were frail and they were simplistic, but they got better. They got much better over the years. Do you know why I formed them? I formed them so that you would love me. So that when my aunt and uncle took me to those singings, and I would walk down the aisle and some lady would say, that's him, Gertrude, right there. That's that kid I was telling you about. He's good. And I'm thinking, you darn right, I'm good. For a few moments, I was somebody. But I had a careful mask on. Most of them knew my father in the communities where they would take me to sing. Most of them knew my dad well. And I knew in my young heart, I can never let this mask slip, because if you see who I really am, if you see that the finest man who's ever lived says I'm nothing, he hates me. He wishes I'd never been born. He just sold me last weekend to a man for a basket of tomatoes. And when he presented me to the man initially offered him a basket of tomatoes and a $5 bill, and my dad said, keep the 5. That's way too much. I was 6 years old the weekend that happened. And I remember standing there thinking, this is what I'm worth. I'm not even worth the extra $5. And so when I would show up at those singings with those initial masks on, they were designed for one purpose and one purpose only. The same reason many of you in this room are wearing yours, even today. Even in a place so anointed and so free and so full of love. Because within your families, within your circle of friends, within the places where you work, and yes, oftentimes even within the confines of a place this anointed and this free. You believe that if you let that mask slip, you will not be